March 19, 1943. North Atlantic, 200 miles southwest of Iceland. Captain Lieutenant Werner Kessler stood in the control room of U-518, listening to the rhythmic ping of enemy sonar sweeping across his boat's hull. The sound had been growing louder for the past 10 minutes. Not good, but not unusual either. The Type 9C U-boat had been hunted before. Kessler had survived 14 patrols. He knew the pattern. The British destroyer would pass overhead, drop its depth charges to the sides and rear, and he would maneuver away from the explosions. Standard procedure. The destroyer's sonar could track his position, but the technology had limitations. Once the attacker passed directly over the U-boat, it lost contact. The depth charges would tumble down through the water column toward where the U-boat had been, not where it was going. This created a window, a chance. Kessler had used it successfully 11 times. "Prepare for depth charge attack," he ordered quietly. His crew had done this drill dozens of times. Reduce speed. Rig for silent running. Go deep. Turn away from the predicted drop zone. Wait for the explosions. Surface when safe. Continue the patrol. The pinging grew more insistent. The destroyer above had solid contact. Kessler could hear the throb of its propellers now, growing louder. Closer. He checked his watch. 30 seconds until it passed overhead. 20 seconds until it lost sonar contact. Then the depth charges would come, tumbling down to detonate at preset depths, hoping to catch him in the pressure wave. Hard to starboard, Kessler ordered, "Take us to 150 meters." The U-boat began its turn. The propeller noise above reached maximum intensity. The destroyer was directly overhead. Sonar contact would be lost right now. Then something completely different happened. The first projectile hit the pressure hull just forward of the conning tower. The contact-fused warhead detonated instantly. No warning. No time to maneuver. Just immediate catastrophic explosion. The blast punched through the hull plating like a hammer through tin. Seawater erupted into the forward compartment under crushing pressure. Before anyone could react, a second projectile struck aft. Then a third hit amidships. The explosions came in rapid succession, each one contact detonated directly against the hull. No depth charge pattern spreading out around the U-boat. No time gap between the attacker passing overhead and the weapons arriving. Just immediate, precise, devastating hits. The entire sequence from first impact to fatal flooding took less than 90 seconds. Kessler never understood what killed him. The technology that destroyed U-518 was unlike anything German U-boat crews had encountered in nearly 4 years of Atlantic warfare. Later, when survivors from other U-boats began reporting similar attacks, German naval intelligence struggled to make sense of the descriptions. A forward-throwing weapon that struck while the destroyer still held sonar contact. Projectiles that only exploded on direct hits. A pattern that turned submarine hunting from a probability game into something approaching certainty. The British called it hedgehog. Over the next 2 years, it would fundamentally alter the mathematics of submarine warfare in ways that went far beyond its tactical effectiveness. This is the story of how a relatively simple weapon system helped break the U-boat threat, and why German commanders found its implications so difficult to accept. Understanding why hedgehog represented such a revolutionary change requires understanding what came before. By early 1943, the Battle of the Atlantic had reached a critical phase. German U-boats were sinking merchant ships faster than the Allies could replace them. In the first quarter of 1943 alone, U-boats sent over 500,000 tons of shipping to the bottom. The mathematics were brutal and simple. If current loss rates continued, Britain would be starved into surrender before enough American troops and equipment could cross the Atlantic to mount an invasion of Europe. The primary Allied anti-submarine weapon was the depth charge. a large canister filled with high hygroexplosive, fitted with a hydrostatic fuse set to detonate at a specific depth. The principle was straightforward. Detect a submarine with sonar. Steam toward its position. Drop depth charges set to explode at the estimated depth of the target. The pressure wave from the explosions would theoretically crush the submarine's hull or at minimum cause enough damage to force it to surface. The reality proved far more complicated. Lieutenant Commander James Thornton of the Royal Navy's Anti-Submarine Warfare Division had spent 2 years analyzing depth charge attacks. His findings, compiled in a classified report dated November 1942, painted a frustrating picture. Out of every 100 depth charge attacks where sonar operators confirmed solid contact with a submerged U-boat, only 6 resulted in confirmed kills. 6%. The statistics were even worse when accounting for attacks where contact was uncertain or intermittent. The problem existed in several layers. First, the fundamental tactical limitation. The British ASDIC sonar system, officially the Allied Submarine Detection Investigation Committee technology, worked by sending sound waves through the water and listening for echoes bouncing back from solid objects. It was effective at ranges up to about 2,000 yards under good conditions, but ASDIC operated by sending pulses downward and forward from the attacking ship. Once that ship passed directly over the submarine, the sound beam couldn't reach the target anymore. The submarine passed into a blind zone directly beneath the attacker. This meant every depth charge attack followed the same sequence. Establish sonar contact. Steam toward the target. Maintain contact as long as possible. Then, just as you reached attack position, lose contact. Drop your depth charges blind, hoping the submarine hadn't maneuvered away from its last known position. The time gap mattered enormously. From the moment the destroyer lost sonar contact until the depth charges reached attack depth typically ranged from 20 to 40 seconds depending on the submarine's depth. During that time, a U-boat traveling at even modest speed could move 60 to 100 feet laterally. The depth charge pattern might bracket where the submarine had been. It rarely bracketed where it was by the time the explosives detonated. Second problem, the depth charges themselves telegraphed the attack. They were rolled off racks at the stern or thrown from side-mounted projectors called K-guns. Either way, the submarine crew could hear them entering the water. Experienced commanders like Kessler learned to count the splashes and estimate the pattern. 6 depth charges in quick succession meant a standard pattern. Time to maneuver. Hard turn. Change depth. Get outside the kill radius before detonation. Third problem, the weapons were indiscriminate. A depth charge detonated whether it hit anything or not. The hydrostatic fuse triggered at the preset depth regardless. This meant every attack produced massive explosions, columns of water shooting hundreds of feet into the air, and a churning maelstrom of turbulence that made sonar useless for several minutes. The attacking ship couldn't tell if it had hit anything until the water calmed down enough to search for debris or oil slicks. By then, a damaged but still functional U-boat could slip away in the confusion. Lieutenant Malcolm Fairweather commanded the destroyer HMS Vanquisher in the North Atlantic escort groups. His log from January 1943 documented 12 separate depth charge attacks on confirmed sonar contacts. None resulted in kills. In 3 cases, his ASDIC operator regained contact after the attack, proving the U-boat had survived and maneuvered away. In 9 cases, contact was lost completely, leaving no way to assess results. "We're dropping explosives into the ocean and hoping," Fairweather wrote in a letter to the Admiralty's Anti-Submarine Warfare Division. "The U-boat commander knows we've lost him the moment we pass overhead. He knows our depth charges need 15 to 30 seconds to reach attack depth. He uses that time. We use hope. This is not a sustainable equation." The statistics supported his pessimism. Despite improvements in sonar technology, despite better training, despite increased numbers of escort vessels, the U-boats were winning. Admiral Karl Dönitz, commander of the German submarine fleet, called this period the happy time. His wolf packs were coordinating attacks on Allied convoys with devastating effectiveness. The Type 7 and Type 9 U-boats could dive to depths beyond the reliable range of early depth charge patterns. They could survive near misses that would have destroyed earlier submarines. Most critically, their commanders had learned the tactical dance: lose contact, change course, change depth, wait for the depth charges, survive, continue hunting. By late 1942, British analysts estimated they needed to drop an average of 150 depth charges to achieve one U-boat kill. Some Atlantic convoys expended their entire stock of depth charges in a single crossing without sinking a single submarine. Merchant ships continued to sink. Escort destroyers ran out of weapons. The Atlantic sea lanes were becoming a graveyard measured in hundreds of thousands of tons. Something needed to change. The depth charge had reached the limits of its effectiveness. German U-boat tactics had evolved faster than Allied weapons technology. What the Royal Navy needed was a weapon that eliminated the fundamental weaknesses. A weapon that could attack while still holding sonar contact. A weapon that only detonated on direct hits, removing the problem of indiscriminate explosions destroying sonar contact. A weapon that gave the submarine no warning and no time to maneuver. In a research facility in Portsmouth, a small team of weapons designers had been working on exactly such a system since 1940. By early 1943, their creation was finally ready for full operational deployment. The name came from the weapon's appearance when all 24 launchers were loaded and ready to fire. It looked like a hedgehog curled up in a defensive ball. The U-boat crews were about to encounter something they had no tactical answer for. The concept behind Hedgehog emerged from a simple question posed by Captain Charles Goodev of the Royal Navy's Miscellaneous Weapons Development Department in June 1940. If the fundamental problem is losing sonar contact before attack, why not throw the weapons forward instead of dropping them to the sides and rear? The idea seemed obvious in retrospect. Launch projectiles ahead of the attacking ship while still maintaining as-dic contact, and you eliminate the blind attack window. The weapons would arrive at the target while your sonar still tracked its position. The submarine commander would have no warning, no time gap to exploit, no opportunity to maneuver away. But transforming the concept into functional hardware proved enormously complex. The engineering challenges seemed almost insurmountable at first analysis. Forward throwing meant you needed to launch heavy projectiles carrying enough explosive to kill a submarine at ranges of at least 200 yards while accounting for the attacking ship's forward motion. The weapons needed to enter the water at precisely calculated angles to create an effective pattern around the target. They needed fuses that wouldn't detonate on water entry or while sinking, but would detonate reliably on contact with a submarine hull. And the entire system needed to be compact enough to mount on escort destroyers that were already crowded with equipment. The development team, led by Lieutenant Commander Geoffrey Duckworth, worked through the problem systematically. For the launch mechanism, they adapted existing technology from Army anti-aircraft weapons. The spigot mortar system had been used successfully in land warfare. A steel rod, the spigot, projected upward from a fixed mounting. The projectile had a hollow tail that slid down over the spigot. A small propellant charge in the tail section detonated, driving the projectile up and forward while the spigot remained fixed in place. The beauty of this system was its simplicity. No complex breech mechanism. No recoil absorption system. The spigot absorbed the firing stress. The projectile was literally thrown forward by the explosion in its tail. Duckworth's team calculated they could mount 24 of these spigot mortars in a 4x6 grid on a tilted platform installed on the foredeck of an escort destroyer. The platform tilted up at 45 degrees. The spigots were arranged so their firing angles would throw projectiles in a circular pattern approximately 100 feet in diameter when they entered the water 250 yards ahead of the ship. Each projectile weighed 35 pounds. The warhead contained 32 pounds of Torpex high explosive, significantly more powerful than standard TNT. The hollow tail section contained the propellant charge and slid down over its assigned spigot. When all 24 mortars fired in rapid sequence, The projectiles would arc through the air and splash down in a circular pattern centered on wherever the ASDIC showed the submarine to be. The fusing system required the most innovative thinking. Standard depth charge fuses used hydrostatic triggers, detonating at preset depths. That wouldn't work for Hedgehog. The entire advantage came from only exploding on contact with the target. Duckworth needed a contact fuse that would withstand the launch, withstand hitting the water at high speed, remain armed while sinking, but detonate instantly on hitting a submarine's hull. The solution used a spring-loaded striker held back by a safety pin. Water pressure during the sink armed the fuse by forcing out the safety pin. Once armed, any solid impact would drive the striker forward into a percussion cap, detonating the main charge. The system was elegant and reliable. Testing showed the projectiles would sink to approximately 250 feet if they didn't hit anything, then become inert and settle to the ocean floor. No indiscriminate explosions. No sonar disruption. Either you hit the submarine or you didn't. The result was binary and immediate. If you're finding value in this level of detail, subscribe and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. These are the stories that don't make it into textbooks. The first operational Hedgehog system was installed aboard HMS Westcott in December 1941. Initial testing revealed problems. The projectiles didn't always arm properly. The pattern dispersal was inconsistent. The mounting frame cracked under repeated firing stress. Duckworth's team went back to the drawing board. They reinforced the mounting system. They modified the fusing mechanism. They adjusted the propellant charges to create more consistent trajectories. By mid-1942, the bugs were resolved. HMS Westcott conducted live fire exercises against a practice submarine in the Irish Sea. The results exceeded expectations. The attacking ship could fire Hedgehog while still holding solid ASDIC contact. The projectiles entered the water in a tight circular pattern. In 3 out of 5 practice runs, at least one projectile scored a simulated hit on the practice target. 3 out of 5 was infinitely better than the 6% success rate of conventional depth charge attacks. Production ramped up quickly. By December 1942, 40 Royal Navy escort destroyers and corvettes had been fitted with Hedgehog systems. By March 1943, the number exceeded 100. The weapon was being installed as standard equipment on all new escort vessels. American shipyards building destroyers and destroyer escorts for Atlantic convoy duty began installing Hedgehog systems as well, using specifications provided by the British. Training procedures emphasized the tactical revolution Hedgehog represented. ASDIC operators learned they no longer needed to break contact before attacking. Track the submarine. Maintain contact. Close to attack range. Fire Hedgehog while still tracking. The projectiles would be in the air for approximately 5 seconds, then in the water sinking toward the target. If sonar showed the submarine maneuvering, the attacking ship could adjust course and fire again. Multiple attacks were possible because Hedgehog produced no sonar-disrupting explosions unless it actually hit something. The psychological advantage was significant, too. Submarine crews had learned to listen for depth charges entering the water, then count seconds until detonation. That warning time allowed them to take evasive action. Hedgehog eliminated the warning. The projectiles entered the water relatively quietly, dispersed over a 100-foot pattern. They sank silently. The submarine crew often had no idea they were under attack until the first warhead detonated against their hull. By then, it was far too late. Lieutenant Commander Fairweather of HMS Vanquisher received his Hedgehog installation in February 1943. His first operational use came on March 3rd, during escort duty for convoy HX-228. ASDIC detected a submarine contact at 1,400 yards. Fairweather closed to attack range while maintaining solid contact. At 250 yards, he fired Hedgehog. 24 projectiles arced forward and splashed down in a pattern centered on the submarine's position. Silence. No explosions. No eat. Fairweather maintained contact and maneuvered for a second attack. This time, 7 seconds after the projectiles entered the water, a massive underwater explosion erupted directly over the target. Then another explosion. Then a third. The ASDIC contact disappeared. Debris began surfacing. Oil, wood fragments, a life jacket, personal effects. U-412 would never return to port. Fairweather's log entry from that day captured the significance simply: first hedgehog kill. Attack duration from initial firing to confirmed destruction, 90 seconds. No evasive maneuvering detected. Submarine appeared to have no warning before detonation. 90 seconds. That number would be repeated in after-action reports throughout 1943 and 1944. The time from Hedgehog launch to submarine destruction averaged between 1 and 2 minutes in successful attacks. Compare that to depth charge attacks that might continue for hours with uncertain results. The efficiency was revolutionary, but efficiency statistics didn't capture the psychological impact on German U-boat crews. As Hedgehog kills mounted through the spring and summer of 1943, survivors began reporting attacks that didn't match any known Allied weapon system. Something was killing U-boats before they could even attempt evasion. Intelligence officers in Admiral Dernitz's headquarters began compiling reports, trying to understand what they were facing. The technical specifications of Hedgehog only partially explained its devastating effectiveness. To understand why it became such a lethal submarine killer, you need to understand the geometry of the attack and why that geometry was almost impossible for U-boat commanders to counter. Traditional depth charge attacks created a three-dimensional problem for submarine commanders. Charges were dropped in patterns designed to bracket the estimated position of the submarine. A standard British pattern used 6 depth charges, 2 dropped from the stern, 4 thrown by K-guns to port and starboard. These would detonate in a rough rectangle, creating 6 separate pressure waves spreading outward spherically from each detonation point. The submarine's best defense was straightforward. Don't be inside that rectangle when the charges detonated. Since the attacking destroyer lost sonar contact before dropping charges, an experienced commander could often maneuver out of the pattern. Hard turn, change depth, create enough displacement that the nearest detonation was beyond lethal pressure range. Hedgehog changed this equation completely. The attack pattern was 2-dimensional rather than 3-dimensional. 24 projectiles splashing down in a circle 100 feet across. But unlike depth charges, these projectiles didn't detonate at a preset depth. They sank continuously, maintaining their circular pattern as they descended. This created a descending column of potential impact points. If the submarine was anywhere within that 100-foot circle at any depth down to 250 feet, it would be hit. The only way to avoid the attack was to be completely outside the circle when the projectiles arrived. And since the attacking ship fired while still holding sonar contact, it knew exactly where the submarine was when firing. The projectiles would land centered on the submarine's current position. Commander Heinrich Vogel of U-634 survived a Hedgehog attack on April 22, 1943. His after-action report, captured when he was later taken prisoner, provides a rare detailed account from the target's perspective. ASDIC contact was established at approximately 0815 hours. Standard British destroyer, estimated range 2,000 meters in closing. I ordered the boat to 120 meters and began evasive maneuvers. Course changes at 3-minute intervals. Speed reduced to minimize sound signature. The destroyer maintained contact despite our maneuvers. Concerning but not unusual with experienced sonar operators. At 0832, the destroyer was directly above us. I ordered hard turn to starboard and increased depth to 150 meters, anticipating depth charge attack. We heard no sound of charges entering the water. No explosions. After 30 seconds, I ordered return to previous course, assuming the destroyer had lost contact or was repositioning for another pass. At 0833, we heard multiple splashes above us. Different sound than depth charges. Lighter, more dispersed. I ordered evasive turn to port, but before the boat could respond, the first detonation occurred directly against the forward pressure hull. The sound was different from depth charge detonation. No pressure wave approaching from a distance. Just immediate, direct explosion against the hull. The forward compartment began flooding immediately. Before damage control could respond, a second detonation struck the control room area. A third struck aft. The boat became uncontrollable. I ordered emergency surface. 7 men died in the flooding. The boat was abandoned on surface. British destroyer recovered 28 survivors. Vogel's description captured the key elements that made Hedgehog so deadly. No warning splashes. No time gap between detection and attack. No possibility of maneuvering away because the weapons tracked the submarine down through the water column. The attack came while the hunters still held contact with the hunted. The contact fusing created another crucial advantage. When Hedgehog projectiles hit water and sank without hitting anything, they produced no explosions. This meant the attacking ship's ASDIC remained functional immediately after attack. The operator could tell right away whether the submarine was still there. If contact remained, the ship could maneuver for another attack within minutes. Multiple Hedgehog attacks in sequence became standard procedure. Lieutenant Thomas Rademacher commanded HMS Starling, one of the most successful anti-submarine vessels of the war. His tactical innovations maximized Hedgehog's advantages. When ASDIC detected a submarine, Starling would close to attack range and fire Hedgehog while maintaining contact. If no detonations occurred, Rademacher would immediately maneuver for a second attack from a different angle, forcing the submarine to maneuver and potentially exposing it to better targeting. On May 7, 1943, Starling detected U-710 at range of 1,800 yards. Rademacher closed and fired Hedgehog. No hits. Maintained contact. Maneuvered 30 degrees to port. Second Hedgehog attack. No hits. The submarine was attempting evasive action, but ASDIC held contact throughout. Third attack. 2 detonations. Contact lost. Debris confirmed kill. Total engagement time from initial detection to confirmed destruction, 11 minutes. Total Hedgehog projectiles expended, 72. Result, certain kill with no damage to attacking vessel and no loss of sonar effectiveness during attack sequence. The efficiency mathematics favored Hedgehog overwhelmingly. A destroyer could carry approximately 100 depth charges or 240 Hedgehog projectiles in equivalent storage space. Those 240 projectiles represented 10 full Hedgehog salvos. Even accounting for the need for multiple attacks per target, Hedgehog allowed sustained anti-submarine operations far longer than depth charge. Loadouts permitted. German naval intelligence struggled to counter a weapon system they didn't fully understand. Initial reports suggested some new type of aerial bomb, but attacks were occurring in weather conditions that prevented air operations. Other reports suggested mines, but the detonations were clearly occurring during active anti-submarine hunts, not in mined waters. The lack of pressure wave preceding detonation confused analysts who assumed all underwater explosions worked like depth charges. By summer 1943, enough survivor reports had been compiled to understand the basic principle. The Allies had developed a forward-throwing weapon that only detonated on contact. Admiral Dönitz issued tactical guidance to all U-boat commanders. When under attack by destroyers exhibiting continuous sonar contact, assume forward-throwing weapons. Conduct maximum evasive maneuvers immediately upon detection. Do not wait for depth charge pattern. The guidance helped marginally. Some U-boats successfully evaded Hedgehog attacks through aggressive maneuvering. But the fundamental mathematics remained unchanged. A submarine could only maneuver so fast underwater. The Hedgehog pattern was large enough and dense enough that even evasive action often resulted in hits. and the continuous sonar contact meant the attacking ship could adjust its aim for second and third attacks based on the submarine's maneuvering. Stories like these reveal the complexity behind the headlines. If you think this level of detail matters, hit subscribe and leave a comment with your thoughts. The success rates documented the weapon's impact. In 1942, before Hedgehog deployment, Royal Navy escorts averaged 1 U-boat kill for every 150 depth charge attacks. In 1943, after Hedgehog entered service, the rate improved to 1 kill for every 60 attacks. By 1944, Hedgehog-equipped vessels were achieving 1 kill for every 40 attacks. The improvement came entirely from Hedgehog's higher probability of hit. More significantly, Hedgehog attacks forced U-boats to remain submerged and defensive far longer than depth charge attacks. A U-boat commander facing conventional depth charges knew he could survive if he just waited out the attack. The destroyer would eventually exhaust its depth charges and depart. But a Hedgehog-equipped destroyer could conduct attack runs for hours without exhausting its ammunition and without degrading its sonar capability. U-boats found themselves pinned down, unable to surface, unable to attack convoys, burning through their battery reserves just trying to survive. The tactical revolution wasn't just about sinking submarines. It was about denying them the ability to operate effectively. A U-boat that spent 8 hours dodging Hedgehog attacks and then had to withdraw to recharge batteries was a U-boat that wasn't sinking merchant ships. The weapon's psychological pressure proved almost as valuable as its direct kill rate. Chapter 4. The first confirmed Hedgehog kill occurred on December 10, 1942, when HMS Lotus sank U-757 in the North Atlantic. The engagement demonstrated both the weapon's potential and the learning curve its operators would need to overcome. Lieutenant Peter Granger commanded Lotus, a Flower-class corvette that had been retrofitted with Hedgehog in November. On convoy escort duty, his ASDIC operator detected a submarine contact at 1900 hours. Range, 1,500 yards. Granger closed to attack position while maintaining contact. At 250 yards, he fired his first operational Hedgehog salvo. The 24 projectiles arced forward and splashed down ahead of the corvette. Granger's crew waited. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. 15 seconds. No detonations. The ASDIC operator reported contact still solid. The submarine hadn't been hit, but it also hadn't escaped. Granger maneuvered 15 degrees to starboard and fired a second salvo. This time, 12 seconds after splashdown, a massive explosion erupted ahead of the ship. Then a second detonation. The ASDIC contact disappeared. Surface debris began appearing. Wooden planking, cork insulation, diesel oil spreading in a slick visible even in the darkness. Granger maintained position and deployed searchlights. The debris field was extensive and consistent with submarine destruction. No survivors were recovered. U-757 had departed Brest 3 weeks earlier under the command of Captain Lieutenant Friedrich Hartwich. It was his 4th patrol. He had sunk 8 merchant ships on previous patrols. The boat carried a crew of 44. None survived. German naval records listed U-757 as missing, presumed lost on December 10th. Post-war analysis of Granger's attack confirmed it as the kill. The engagement validated Hedgehog's operational concept, but it also revealed nuances of employment. The first salvo missed despite solid sonar contact and proper firing procedure. The second salvo hit, but only after Granger adjusted his approach angle. Early doctrine assumed Hedgehog would achieve hits on first attack if ASDIC contact was solid. Combat experience showed the inherent inaccuracy of sonar itself created variables. Sonar could locate a submarine to within about 50 feet, laterally and 20 feet in depth, under ideal conditions. Under combat conditions, with the submarine maneuvering and sea conditions affecting sound propagation, the error margins increased significantly. The Hedgehog pattern was 100 feet across, providing some margin for error. But if the operator's position estimate was off by 75 feet, the entire pattern might miss. Royal Navy anti-submarine doctrine, adapted quickly. Hedgehog was most effective when ASDIC contact was held continuously for at least 2 minutes before firing, allowing the operator to track the submarine's course and speed accurately. Attacks from multiple angles increased hit probability. Most importantly, crews learned not to expect first-shot kills. Hedgehog's advantage was allowing rapid follow-up attacks without losing sonar contact. Use that advantage. Fire, assess, maneuver. Fire again. By March 1943, when U-518 was sunk by the attack described in the opening, Hedgehog tactics had matured significantly. The weapon was being employed systematically across the North Atlantic convoy routes. U-boat losses began climbing. January 1943, 12 U-boats lost. February, 15 U-boats lost. March, 19 U-boats lost. April, 17 U-boats lost. May, 41 U-boats lost. The May numbers shocked German Naval Command. 41 boats lost in a single month was unsustainable. Admiral Dönitz had begun the war with 57 U-boats total. He now had over 400 operational, and he was losing them faster than shipyards could replace them. Something fundamental had shifted in the Battle of the Atlantic. Multiple factors contributed to the May massacre. Improved air coverage from long-range patrol aircraft, better convoy organization. Crucially important, the Allies had broken German naval codes and were reading U-boat radio traffic in near real time, allowing convoys to be routed away from Wolfpack concentrations. But Hedgehog played a significant role. When U-boats were detected, they were increasingly being destroyed rather than merely driven off. Korvettenkapitän Klaus Schreiber served in the U-boat command analysis section in Berlin. His job was evaluating loss reports and identifying patterns. In June 1943, he compiled a classified assessment of the new Allied anti-submarine weapons. Analysis of survivor reports indicates the British have deployed a forward-throwing anti-submarine weapon, designation unknown, effective range approximately 200 to 300 meters. The weapon appears to use multiple projectiles, estimated 20 to 30 per salvo, detonating only on contact with the submarine hull. This represents a fundamental tactical shift. Traditional depth charge attacks allowed our commanders time to maneuver after the attacking destroyer lost sonar contact. The new weapon eliminates this window. The destroyer maintains contact throughout the attack. Our commanders report the first indication of attack is often the detonation against the hull itself. No warning, no time for evasive action. Current tactical guidance recommending maximum evasive maneuvers upon detection is having limited success. The weapons pattern appears large enough to cover most evasive maneuvers possible at submerged speeds. Multiple attacks in sequence are commonly reported. Destroyers can fire repeatedly without losing contact. Recommendation: U-boat tactics must be revised to avoid detection entirely rather than relying on ability to survive attacks. This significantly reduces operational effectiveness. Schreiber's assessment captured the strategic problem. Hedgehog didn't just sink U-boats more efficiently. It forced them to be more cautious, to avoid contact with escorts, to operate more conservatively. A U-boat that avoided detection couldn't sink merchant ships. The weapon's deterrent effect exceeded its direct kill count. Kapitän Sir C. Victor Stumpf commanded U-263, one of the more successful boats of the 1943 period. His patrol log from July demonstrates the changed tactical environment. Over 28 days at sea, U-263 detected 7 convoys. Stumpf initiated attacks on 2. Both times, escort destroyers detected his boat before he could reach attack position on the merchant ships. Both times, the escorts maintained continuous sonar contact and pressed attacks for hours. Both times, Stumpf was forced to break off and withdraw without firing torpedoes. "The British escorts are far more aggressive than previous patrols," he wrote. "They maintain contact despite our evasive maneuvers. They attack repeatedly with weapons that appear to track us through depth changes. We have expended significant battery reserves simply evading attacks. torpedo attacks on convoys have become extremely difficult. U-263 returned to port with all torpedoes unfired. Stumpf, an experienced commander with 15 merchant ships to his credit on earlier patrols, had been rendered completely ineffective by the changed tactical environment. This was the real impact of Hedgehog and the other technological improvements in Allied anti-submarine warfare. Not just sinking U-boats, but preventing them from sinking ships. The statistical inflection point came in May 1943. That was the month when Allied merchant ship losses in the Atlantic dropped below U-boat losses for the first time in the war. More submarines were being sunk than merchant ships. The mathematics that had favored Germany for 3 years had reversed. Admiral Dönitz recognized this immediately. On May 24, 1943, he ordered all U-boats to withdraw from the North Atlantic convoy routes temporarily while new tactics were developed. It was an admission of defeat in the campaign that had come closest to winning the war for Germany. The U-boats would return to the Atlantic, and the battle would continue until Germany's surrender. But the period of U-boat supremacy was over. They would never again threaten to cut Britain's Atlantic lifeline. Hedgehog wasn't solely responsible for this shift. Improved radar, better air coverage, code breaking, escort carriers, improved training, better convoy organization, all these factors combined to defeat the U-boat threat. But Hedgehog represented a crucial tactical advantage. It turned submarine hunting from a low-probability game of chance into a weapons system that could destroy submarines efficiently and repeatedly. The weapon's simplicity, its reliability, and its compatibility with existing sonar systems made it deployable across hundreds of escort vessels quickly. The Hedgehog system that entered service in late 1942 was not the final form of the weapon. Combat experience drove continuous improvements throughout 1943 and 1944. The evolution of the system demonstrated how operational feedback could refine technology in wartime. One of the earliest problems identified was the mounting system. The original Hedgehog installation positioned the 24 spigot mortars on a fixed frame angled at 45 degrees. This created a problem for smaller corvettes and frigates. The frame's size and weight distribution affected the ship's handling, particularly in rough seas. The recoil from firing all 24 projectiles in rapid sequence could actually slow the attacking ship's forward motion by several knots. Engineers at the Portsmouth Weapons Development Facility designed a lighter frame using different steel alloys. Weight was reduced by approximately 30% without sacrificing structural strength. This improved version, designated Hedgehog Mark II, began installation on new escort vessels in mid-1943. Existing ships were retrofitted as they cycled through port for maintenance. The projectiles themselves also evolved. The original design used a tail fin arrangement to stabilize flight after launch. Combat experience showed the fins occasionally failed, causing projectiles to tumble and land outside the intended pattern. The Mark II projectile eliminated the fins entirely and relied on the projectile's shape and weight distribution for stable flight. This simplified manufacturing and improved pattern consistency. Fusing reliability improved through several iterations. Early Hedgehog attacks occasionally experienced dud rates as high as 10%. Investigation revealed that the arming mechanism was sensitive to water temperature and salinity variations. North Atlantic water conditions differed significantly from the coastal waters where initial testing had occurred. Modified fusing mechanisms with more robust arming systems reduced dud rates to below 3% by early 1944. The Americans, producing Hedgehog systems under license for U.S. Navy escort vessels, introduced their own modifications. U.S. ships tended to be larger than British corvettes, allowing for heavier mounting systems. American engineers developed a trainable Hedgehog mount that could be rotated to fire at angles offset from the ship's centerline. This allowed attacks without pointing the ship directly at the target, improving tactical flexibility. British trials of the American trainable mount showed promise, but the system was heavier and more mechanically complex than the fixed British design. The Royal Navy generally preferred the simpler, lighter British version for smaller escorts, while American destroyer escorts used the trainable version. Both systems proved effective in combat. Tactical doctrine continued evolving based on accumulating combat data. By late 1943, standard Royal Navy procedure for hedgehog attacks followed a refined pattern. Establish solid ASDIC contact and maintain for minimum 2 minutes to track target course and speed. Coast to optimal firing range, defined as 200 to 250 yards. Fire first hedgehog salvo. If no detonations within 15 seconds, assume miss. Maneuver 30 to 45 degrees off original approach and fire second salvo. If still no detonations, maneuver again and fire third salvo. After 3 salvos without hit, break off to allow other escorts to attack from different angles. This doctrine recognized Hedgehog's advantages while acknowledging its limitations. The weapon was highly effective when the submarine's position was accurately known, but sonar wasn't perfect. Multiple attacks from different angles increased probability of hit. Coordinated attacks by multiple Hedgehog-equipped escorts could bracket a submarine from several directions, making evasion nearly impossible. Captain Robert Sherwood commanded the escort group that included HMS Starling, HMS Kite, and HMS Magpie, all Hedgehog-equipped sloops. His coordinated tactics became a model for anti-submarine operations. When ASDIC detected a submarine, Sherwood would position his 3 ships in a triangular formation around the contact. Each ship would maintain independent sonar contact. They would coordinate attacks in sequence, forcing the submarine to maneuver constantly. One ship would fire Hedgehog while the other 2 maintained contact and tracked the submarine's evasion. As soon as the first attack was complete, a second ship would fire from a different angle. The submarine was given no time to settle into defensive depth or course. Using these tactics, Sherwood's escort group sank 6 U-boats between November 1943 and March 1944. The average time from initial detection to confirmed destruction was 38 minutes. The average number of Hedgehog salvos per kill was 4.3. The efficiency compared to depth charge operations was dramatic. German U-boat command attempted to develop counter-tactics. The most promising approach was the Aphrodite decoy system. This involved releasing chemicals that created false sonar contacts, potentially drawing Hedgehog attacks away from the submarine's actual position. Field testing showed some success, but the system had limitations. The decoys didn't maneuver like a real submarine, so experienced ASDIC operators could often distinguish them from genuine targets. And even when decoys worked, they only delayed the inevitable. The attacking escorts would eventually identify the true target and resume attacks. Another German approach involved extreme depth operations. The Type 7C and Type 9C 40 U-boats could dive to depths approaching 300 meters in emergency situations. This was below Hedgehog's maximum effective depth of approximately 250 feet. However, diving so deep put enormous stress on the pressure hull and couldn't be sustained for long. It also meant the submarine was too deep to attack convoys, defeating the purpose of being on patrol. The most effective German counter to Hedgehog was ironically a return to surface operations. In late 1943, some U-boat commanders began operating primarily on the surface at night, using the cover of darkness to evade visual detection while maintaining higher speed and better observation of convoy movements. This avoided the underwater environment where Hedgehog was so deadly. But it exposed U-boats to radar-equipped escorts and long-range patrol aircraft. The tactical environment had become hostile in all dimensions. By 1944, U-boat effectiveness had declined to levels that made Atlantic operations nearly suicidal. The casualty rate for U-boat crews exceeded 70%. For every 10 men who left port on patrol, 7 would never return. The average U-boat survival time from commissioning to destruction was approximately 6 months. Young commanders on their first or second patrol faced vastly more dangerous conditions than the experienced captains who had operated during the earlier happy times. Hedgehog contributed significantly to these statistics. Between December 1942 and May 1945, Hedgehog attacks accounted for approximately 80 confirmed U-boat kills and at least 50 more probable kills where evidence was insufficient for confirmation. This represented roughly 15% of all U-boat losses during that period. More significantly, Hedgehog-equipped escorts achieved these kills while expending far less ammunition and suffering far less damage than conventional depth charge operations would have required. The weapon's impact extended beyond direct kill statistics. The psychological pressure of facing a weapons system that struck without warning, that gave no opportunity for evasion, that could attack repeatedly without losing tracking. This fundamentally changed submarine warfare. U-boat crews went to sea knowing that if they were detected by a Hedgehog-equipped escort, their chances of survival were minimal. That knowledge affected decision-making at every level, from individual commanders deciding whether to press an attack to strategic planning at Admiral Dernitz's headquarters. Understanding Hedgehog's significance requires placing it within the broader technological and tactical evolution of World War II anti-submarine warfare. The weapon didn't emerge in isolation, and it didn't win the Battle of the Atlantic single-handedly. But it represented a crucial component of a comprehensive system that transformed submarine hunting from a desperate defensive battle into an effective offensive operation. The Atlantic Battle from 1940 to 1943 had been characterized by German tactical and technological advantage. U-boats operated with relative impunity, coordinating in wolf packs, using radio communications to concentrate forces against convoys, diving to depths that made depth charge attacks difficult. British and American escorts scrambled to defend merchant ships with weapons and sensors that were barely adequate for the task. The turning point came when multiple technological improvements converged in late 1942 and early 1943. Sedimetric radar allowed escort ships to detect surfaced U-boats at night, and in poor weather, eliminating the submarine's ability to operate freely on the surface. Long-range B-24 Liberator aircraft, equipped with radar, closed the mid-Atlantic air gap, where U-boats had previously operated beyond land-based air cover. Escort carriers provided air cover for convoys throughout their Atlantic crossing. High-frequency direction finding equipment allowed escorts to locate U-boats by their radio transmissions. And critically, Allied codebreakers were reading German naval communications, providing warning of U-boat positions and wolf-pack formations. Into this technological revolution came Hedgehog. The weapon complemented the other systems perfectly. Radar and aircraft detected submarines and forced them underwater. Once submerged, ASDIC tracked them, and Hedgehog destroyed them with unprecedented efficiency. The combination of detection, tracking, and killing technologies created a comprehensive anti-submarine system that the U-boats couldn't counter. The impact on the war's larger strategic picture was profound. Germany's strategy depended on severing Britain's Atlantic lifeline before American industrial power could be brought to bear in Europe. If U-boats could sink merchant ships faster than the Allies could build them, Britain would be starved into surrender and the cross-channel invasion would become impossible. The mathematics of tonnage warfare were straightforward. Germany needed to sink approximately 700,000 tons of shipping per month to achieve strategic victory in the Atlantic. In 1942, U-boats approached this target in several months. November 1942 saw over 700,000 tons sunk. The situation appeared desperate for the Allies. Then the technology and tactics shifted. By July 1943, monthly sinkings had dropped below 100,000 tons. By late 1944, U-boats were sinking so few ships that their operations became strategically irrelevant. This collapse in U-boat effectiveness enabled the Allied victory in Europe. The massive military buildup in Britain prior to D-Day required shipping millions of tons of equipment and supplies across the Atlantic. The invasion itself depended on maintaining supply lines across the English Channel and continuing Atlantic convoys to sustain operations in France. None of this would have been possible if the U-boat threat had remained at 1942 levels. Hedgehog's role in this strategic shift extended beyond its direct kill count. The weapon represented a new approach to naval warfare that emphasized technological sophistication and systematic operations over individual heroics. The Royal Navy's anti-submarine campaign became increasingly scientific. Operational research groups analyzed attack data, identified optimal tactics, and disseminated best practices across the escort fleet. Hedgehog's clear success metrics: you either hit the submarine or you didn't, made it easier to evaluate what worked and what didn't. The weapon also demonstrated the value of relatively simple, focused solutions to specific tactical problems. Hedgehog wasn't technologically revolutionary in the way radar or sonar were. It was essentially a collection of mortars throwing contact-fused bombs. But it solved a specific problem with elegant efficiency. The simplicity made the system reliable and easy to maintain. Escort crews could learn to operate Hedgehog effectively with relatively brief training. The weapon didn't require specialists or extensive technical knowledge. Post-war analysis by both British and American naval intelligence assessed Hedgehog as one of the most cost-effective weapons systems of the war. The development cost was minimal compared to major weapons programs. Production was straightforward using existing manufacturing capabilities. Installation on escort vessels was quick and didn't require extensive modification. Yet the tactical advantage provided was enormous. The return on investment, measured in U-boats destroyed per dollar spent, exceeded almost any other naval weapon system. The Germans recognized this in their own post-war assessments. Admiral Dönitz, interrogated by Allied intelligence after Germany's surrender, listed Hedgehog among the top 5 technological factors that defeated the U-boat campaign. He noted particularly the weapon's psychological impact on his commanders. The lack of warning before detonation, the inability to evade through standard tactics, and the weapon's reliability all contributed to a sense among U-boat crews that the Atlantic had become a death trap rather than a battlefield. Accounts like this deserve to be remembered. If you think so too, leave a comment and hit like for more untold stories from World War II. The weapon's influence extended into post-war naval development. Every major navy studied Hedgehog and developed similar forward-throwing anti-submarine weapons. The American weapon Alpha system used the same basic principle, but with larger projectiles and longer range. The Soviet Navy developed multiple versions of forward-throwing mortars based on captured German analysis of Hedgehog. Modern anti-submarine warfare still uses descendants of the Hedgehog concept, though with sophisticated guidance systems and larger warheads. The human cost of the Atlantic battle deserves acknowledgement in any assessment of the weapons used. Over 30,000 Allied merchant seamen died in the Atlantic. Nearly 3/4 of all German U-boat crew who served in the Atlantic campaign died. Over 28,000 German submariners were killed. These were young men, most in their 20s, fighting in conditions that were terrifying regardless of which side they served. U-boat crews faced death by drowning in steel coffins hundreds of feet underwater. Merchant seamen faced death by exposure in the North Atlantic's freezing waters. Escort crews faced death by torpedo or mine while trying to protect the convoys. The efficiency of Hedgehog meant more U-boat crews died. There's no avoiding that calculation. The weapon's lethality came from its ability to strike without warning and kill quickly. Very few U-boat crews survived Hedgehog attacks. When the projectiles hit, the submarine typically went down with all hands. From a tactical perspective, this was exactly what the weapon was designed to do. From a human perspective, it meant thousands of young German sailors experienced death by catastrophic flooding and crushing pressure, often without understanding what had hit them. This moral complexity doesn't create equivalence between the sides. Germany's aggression initiated the war. The U-boat campaign targeted civilian merchant shipping as a deliberate strategy. Allied anti-submarine operations were defensive responses to an existential threat. But acknowledging that doesn't eliminate the reality that war kills people and efficient weapons kill people efficiently. The operators of Hedgehog systems were doing their duty, protecting convoys and saving merchant seamen. The U-boat crews they killed were also young men following orders, many of whom had little say in the war their nation had started. The legacy of Hedgehog exists in multiple dimensions. Technologically, it demonstrated that focused solutions to specific tactical problems could have strategic impact. Operationally, it showed the value of weapon systems that complemented existing detection and tracking capabilities rather than replacing them. Strategically, it contributed to the defeat of Germany's most dangerous naval campaign. Humanly, it represented another increment in the industrial efficiency of killing that characterized World War II. The weapon's name, chosen for its visual appearance when loaded and ready to fire, proved darkly appropriate. The Hedgehog deploys its spines as defense. The weapon system deployed its projectiles to deadly effect. Those 24 spigot mortars arranged in a grid, throwing their contact-fused warheads in a pattern that gave submarines no escape. They changed the mathematics of submarine warfare at a critical moment in the war's trajectory. German U-boat commanders couldn't believe a weapon system could be so effective and so simple. The technology wasn't exotic. The principle was straightforward, but the tactical advantage was overwhelming. 90 seconds from launch to destruction was achievable because the weapon eliminated every advantage submarines had developed against depth charges. No warning, no evasion time, no blind firing. Just forward-thrown projectiles sinking through the water column, waiting for contact with steel hulls. The Battle of the Atlantic was won by many factors converging. Better intelligence, improved radar, long-range aircraft, escort carriers, more escort ships, better organization, improved training, code-breaking success, and increased industrial production. Hedgehog was one weapon system among many advances. But it was the weapon that transformed the terminal phase of submarine hunting from probability into near certainty. When a Hedgehog-equipped escort held solid as-dick contact and close to attack range, the submarine's chances of survival dropped dramatically. That's what the German U-boat captains couldn't believe. That a relatively simple weapon system could fundamentally change the tactical equation they'd operated under for years. That their experience, their training, their tactics, all of it became nearly useless against an enemy who could throw explosives at them while still tracking them. Explosives that only detonated on contact, exploding directly against the hull with no warning. 90 seconds. That was often all it took. Detection. Approach. Fire. Impact. Detonation. Destruction. The efficiency was revolutionary. The human cost was enormous. The strategic impact helped win the war. The legacy influenced naval warfare for generations, all from a weapon system that looked like a hedgehog and struck with its spines.